back with a look at the weather prospects for your region, plus the all-important forecast for Florida. Will the space shuttle make it off the launch pad today? We'll endeavor to find out and go live to the Kennedy Space Center in just a couple of minutes' time. Tell us about the weather in Florida this morning. How are things looking for the shuttle launch today?
We just received some information from the Kennedy Space Center, and they are saying there is a slight chance of showers. The temperature is presently 68 degrees. It's 20 degrees on the Celsius scale. So there is an outside chance we might pick up a shower. Their parameters allow for it to be outside of 15 nautical miles. So we think it may be far enough away, but what we're watching for is the potential for maybe some low clouds or maybe some fog that might roll in. Certainly is possible over the next several hours.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed. Thanks, Karen. Of course, the space shuttle was due to blast off yesterday, but NASA aborted the launch when an alarm went off in the cockpit. If all goes according to plan today, the shuttle carrying the second piece of the International Space Station should lift off in just over 3.5 hours' time. To find out how things are going, we're joined now from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida by Niels O'Brien. Miles.
Terry, as you referred to, NASA had hoped by about now that the Space Shuttle Endeavour would be about a third of the way through its 14th orbit of the planet Earth. Instead, it sits about 3 miles behind me at Launch Pad 39A here at the Kennedy Space Center. The 6-member crew is at the launch pad right now and is getting on board the Space Shuttle, getting strapped in and ready for a second attempt at launching their 12-day historic mission. Let's look at some live pictures from the so-called White Room, which is the gantry leading into the entrance to the Space Shuttle. The pilot, Rick Sturko, is in the White Room now, getting ready and getting suited up to get inside. The commander, Bob Cabana, is already aboard, getting strapped in. Mission specialist Jim Newman is aboard as well. The Space Shuttle team a little bit disappointed after yesterday's scrub situation. The weather situation was dicey throughout most of the day. The weather cleared off, and then as they were about to launch, with less than 5 minutes to go, a mysterious alarm sounded inside the cockpit of the Space Shuttle. Turns out that a hydraulic pressure gauge had dipped somewhat for a fraction of a second. That caused that alarm. It really wasn't a problem, but it took engineers precious time to figure out what the problem was and realize that it wasn't a showstopper. The fact remains that that time was so precious that it sent them beyond their launch window. Very precise timing for these space station launches. In this case, the Space Shuttle Endeavour will be carrying the first U.S. piece of the space station to join up with the first Russian piece, which is already in orbit. It's important that the Space Shuttle launch more or less when the Russian piece is overhead. Otherwise, the shuttle would never be able to catch up. So that leaves NASA with about a 10-minute launch window to get the shuttle into orbit, making it very difficult to get everything just precisely right with the weather and the technicalities, as we learned yesterday. NASA optimistic, however, that the engineering is looking good this morning. So far, all systems are go. The weather, as you referred to just a few moments ago, about the same as yesterday, a 40% chance that weather will inhibit the ability for NASA to launch the Space Shuttle Endeavour on this historic mission this evening. Miles O'Brien, CNN, reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center, Florida. Terry?
Now, Miles, I understand when the shuttle was finally ready to go again yesterday, it was just 1 or 2 seconds past that window. Is timing here really that critical, or is NASA just being inflexible?
Well, when something is moving at 18,000 miles an hour, a second or two means everything. And when NASA says that that window closes at a certain time, they mean it right to the second. Literally, if they had launched yesterday beyond that second, they tell me they would not have been able to rendezvous with that Russian module. There wasn't enough fuel in the shuttle to get it to the Russian module. So a second doesn't seem like much to you or I, but when things are moving that quickly, I guess it is important.
Now, assuming that the launch does go ahead today, will the delay have had any impact on the mission itself?
No, everything about the mission just sort of slides one day. The launch is a little bit earlier in the morning than it would have been yesterday, just to once again coincide with the location of the Russian module. Otherwise, it's still a 12-day mission. Everything just happens about 24 hours later.
Miles O'Brien at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, thanks for joining us.
Space Shuttle Endeavour this morning, although weather conditions don't look too favorable for liftoff. The shuttle was initially scheduled to take off yesterday, But the launch had to be postponed after a loud flashing alarm went off in the cockpit just 4.5 minutes to countdown. A team of experts has since determined the alarm posed no threat to the mission. The shuttle is set to continue with the construction of the $60 billion International Space Station.
And we'll be bringing you live coverage of the launch of Endeavour. There'll be a special program on the liftoff starting in a little over an hour's time. We'll be keeping our fingers crossed for good weather. And we wouldn't say no to some good weather here either. Let's find out.
Hitch today as the crew of the Space Shuttle Endeavour prepare again for blastoff. Is due to blast off in half an hour from now, and NASA is hoping there won't be any last-minute hitch. Yesterday's takeoff was postponed after a cockpit alarm went off minutes before countdown. And for more now, we go over to CNN's Miles O'Brien at Florida's Kennedy Space Center. Miles, how's it looking for today?
So far, so good, Rosemary. No technical problems to report. The weather okay right now, still indicating 40% chance that the weather will be a problem, 60% chance that the weather will not get in the way of an on-time launch of Endeavour, scheduled now for about 35 minutes from now. Let's look at some live pictures. What you're seeing right now is the Launch Control Center. The Launch Control Center is right nearby where I stand. And on the launch pad about 3 miles away from that Launch Control Center is the Space Shuttle Endeavour, fully loaded with 500,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, which will help fuel those shuttle main engines as it continues its 8.5-minute ascent into orbit, hopefully about 35 minutes from now. The 6-member crew has been aboard the shuttle for a couple of hours now. The crew was strapped in and the hatch was closed about an hour and a half ago. Everything is okay. The communications has been good with the crew thus far. Yesterday, you'll recall, there was a difficulty right at about 4.5 minutes in the countdown. The weather had just broken, and a master alarm sounded in the cockpit, indicating there was a problem with the hydraulic system. What had happened was that hydraulic pressure had dipped down for a fraction of a second, which triggered that alarm. It wasn't really a problem, but in the time it took to discover that very fact, the launch control here went past the very narrow window which is allowed for launches on the International Space Station. Once on orbit, the Space Shuttle Endeavour, carrying the first U.S. piece of the International Space Station, will race across the planet and try to catch up with the Russian piece, which was launched 2 weeks ago. That Russian power plant and control module called Zarya will be linked up with the Unity docking node, which is the U.S. piece. That 6-sided docking node will allow future pieces of the space station to be attached, as well as future shuttle missions. It will require 3 spacewalks to attach all the cables and antennas and handholds outside that embryonic space station during this 12-day mission. So far what they're telling us here at the Kennedy Space Center, all things look good for launch in a little more than 35 minutes, and we will keep you posted as the countdown continues. Rosemary?
Miles, last night they missed out by just a few minutes. Why is it so important that they catch that tiny window of opportunity?
Well, when things are moving at about 18,000 miles an hour, things have to be timed very, very precisely. Basically, what the space shuttle is waiting for is for that Russian piece, Zarya, to be pretty much right overhead. And that's when they have that opportunity to launch. That gives NASA about 10 minutes in order to launch the Space Shuttle Endeavour, in order to catch up with Zarya.
Miles O'Brien in Florida, thanks very much for that update. And Miles... And you're watching minutes. Space Shuttle Endeavour is scheduled to lift off. Yesterday's launch was postponed after the cockpit alarm sounded just minutes before takeoff. The orbiter will add the first U.S. elements to the $60 billion International Space Station. And for joining us, CNN's live coverage from Kennedy Space Center is coming up next, right after this short break.
coverage of a live event.
Hello, I'm Rosemary Church at the CNN Centre. We welcome viewers in the United States and around the world to our coverage of the Space Shuttle Endeavour. It's expected to launch just minutes from now from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. CNN's Miles O'Brien is there to tell us about the mission and guide us through the launch. Miles, what's been happening so far?
So far, so good, Rosemary. The countdown continues. We're at about 5 minutes and counting down to the launch of the Space Shuttle Endeavour. NASA reporting no technical problems whatsoever and no weather problems whatsoever. Let's take a look at the launch pad. The Space Shuttle Endeavour out there loaded up with 500,000 gallons of cryogenic fuel, liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. There off in the distance, you see the countdown clock as well. The 6-member crew strapped in and ready, of course. Communications going back and forth between the orbiter and the Launch Control Center about 3 miles away, not far from where I stand right now. You're listening to Bruce Buckingham of NASA as he helps us along here. You're looking at the 3 main engines there.
Safe and armed devices have been armed.
That off-gassing is from the liquid hydrogen and oxygen, which is stored in a very cold manner and thus causes that kind of steamy effect at the bottom of the shuttle where the main engines are.
This mission carries a crew of 6 who will spend the next 12 days in space working to connect the first 2 International Space Station components.
Bruce Buckingham telling us a little bit about this mission. We have a very narrow launch window, as we told you last night, Rosemary, a 10-minute launch window. Essentially what the shuttle is waiting for right now is for the first piece of that International Space Station, the Russian Zarya control and propulsion module, to pretty much be overhead, so that when the shuttle launches, it can easily rendezvous with it, and then in a later few days into the mission, attach the first U.S. piece to it.
T-minus 3 minutes, 30 seconds, and counting.
You're looking at some animation right here. The 50-foot robotic arm of the Space Shuttle Endeavour will plop that Russian piece on top of the Unity module, and then 3 spacewalks will be conducted, 3 long ones involving 2 spacewalkers in each case. They'll be connecting a series of cables on the outside, attaching handholds and antennas to it. All this done at 240 miles above the surface of the Earth, traveling at nearly 18,000 miles per hour.
And all is going well for launch this morning as NASA prepares for the first of many visits to the International Space Station.
They're seeing that animation of the Unity attaching to Zarya, which was launched 2 weeks ago from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Russia.
Pressurization of the liquid oxygen tank located inside the external tank is underway.
Some of the final stages of the launch going on right now. We're now at about 2.5 minutes left.
The vent hood will slowly be retracted away from the top of the external tank.
How difficult do they expect this project to be?
I'm sorry, Rosemary, say it
How
again.
difficult do they expect this particular mission to be?
Well, it's difficult to know what to expect in a project like this. It is truly unprecedented. 45 separate launches, 100 pieces, 1 million pounds in orbit. Nothing like this has ever been tried before. The space station cannot be assembled on Earth, so many of the pieces will never have seen each other until they get into orbit. To say it's there you hear from the launch director talking to the commander.
Roger, thanks a lot. Yeah, let's just go for each.
It involves 16 separate nations. The logistics of this endeavor are difficult to overstate.
Minus 1 minute, 45 seconds, and counting.
You see the top piece on top of that orange external tank of the space shuttle being removed. That is what aids the fueling process of the space shuttle. The 2 white rockets on either side, the solid rocket boosters, do the majority of the work in getting the Endeavour to orbit. It takes about 8.5 minutes from the launch pad there to get Endeavour into orbit. A speedy ride indeed.
And Miles, what's ahead for the 6 astronauts in the next 12 days?
Well, it's going to be a busy 12 days. The first task at hand will be to race up to that
60 seconds and counting.
To that Zarya module, rendezvous with it, pluck it on top of the U.S. piece, and then conduct a series of spacewalks to connect everything.
Here we are transferring to orbiter internal power at this time. Endeavour is now running all this time.
The connections are, it's like putting together spaghetti. It's not going to be an easy task for the spacewalkers. Once everything has been connected and the 2 pieces have been mated properly, It will be slowly pressurized, and the crew will go inside. Let's listen in to Bruce Buckingham as we get close to launch here.
T-minus 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. We have a go for main engine start. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour with the first American element of the International Space Station, uniting our efforts in space to achieve our common goals.
Roll program.
Houston's now controlling. Endeavour is rolling on a course heading northeast from the Kennedy Space Center toward a 240 throttled down to 2/3 throttle to prepare the spacecraft to pass through the area of maximum aerodynamic pressure, also called max Q.
Check it, throttle up.
Three engines on Endeavour now back at full throttle.
Endeavour, you're go at throttle up. Roger, go at throttle.
Altitude now 11 miles. Endeavour speed 1,500 miles per hour, 8 miles northeast of the Kennedy Space Center. 1.5 minutes since liftoff, Endeavour's already burned more than 2.25 million pounds of propellant, weighing less than half of what it did at launch. Altitude now 19 miles. Speed 2,400 miles per hour. Flight controller standing by for burnout and jettison of the twin solid rockets, coming up in about 10 seconds. Booster officer confirming a good separation of the twin solid rockets. Endeavour's speed now 3,200 miles per hour as it moves into its second stage, 3 main engines.
Endeavour, your performance is nominal. You are 2-engine Maroon.
Performance nominal, 2-engine Maroon.
That call indicating that all performance for the spacecraft right on target, all engines operating normally. Altitude now 42 miles. 61 miles northeast of the Kennedy Space Center.
You're listening to the voice of James Hartsfield of NASA, and when they say 2-engine Maroon, that means essentially if they lost one of the shuttle's main engines, the shuttle could make it to Morón, Spain, one of the transatlantic abort locations. So far, everything has gone like clockwork for the Space Shuttle Endeavour. Those solid rocket boosters jettisoned exactly when they should be, about 2 minutes and 5 seconds into the flight. The solid rocket boosters do about 75% of the work of getting the Space Shuttle Endeavour into orbit. It is an 8.5-minute ride altogether before they can attain zero gravity and orbit around the planet. Right now, the shuttle is operating on the 3 main engines, drawing fuel from that huge orange tank, which is still attached to the space shuttle. At about 8.5 minutes in, the space shuttle will turn off those main engines, and that big tank will be jettisoned. It will fall into the ocean, breaking up along the way. It is not reused. Those solid rocket boosters, which you saw jettisoning in about 2 minutes in, are recovered off of the Atlantic Ocean. They're reconditioned and reused in later flights.
That call indicating that Endeavour's gained too much speed and too much altitude to return to the Kennedy Space Center for a landing if that were needed. Again, all systems in good condition on board. Altitude 62 miles. Endeavour now traveling 5,500 miles per hour, 180 miles northeast of the Kennedy Space Center.
So 0 to 5,500 miles per hour in about 4 minutes. That's what you might say fairly good performance. It is coming up on the point at about 4 minutes and 20 seconds when they have reached the point where the space shuttle, no matter what happens, even if another engine is lost, could attain at least some sort of
Endeavour,
orbit.
your pressed ATO, select Zaragoza.
Pressed ATO, select Zaragoza.
A call indicating that Endeavour could reach a lower than planned but safe orbit on only 2 engines if required. All 3 engines continue to operate well. Altitude 67 miles. Endeavour speed now 6,800 miles per hour. 260 miles northeast of the Kennedy Space Center. About 3 minutes and 15 seconds till cutoff of the main engines.
Once again, the voice of James Hartsfield, who is with the Public Affairs Office of NASA, sitting at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. The Johnson Space Center takes control of the mission from the moment the space shuttle clears the tower.
Endeavour, your single engine ops 3.
Single engine ops 3.
CNN's Tony Clark is in Houston, standing by, watching this scene. Tony, you've seen many of these launches before. There's nothing quite like a night launch, is there?
There really isn't. It's a beautiful sight to see there at your vantage point at the Kennedy Space Center. There is, I think, a lot of excitement here that this mission is finally underway. As you say, the mission controllers gained control just shortly after the liftoff, just about the time the roll program began, and control switches here and will remain here throughout the remainder of the mission. And so it's interesting, though, that there are many mission controls, more mission controls this time than usual, because you have a mission control in Russia that is monitoring the Zara space module. You also have mission control here, and there is also a space station mission control. So a lot of people overseeing this mission, Miles.
And as you speak right now, we're seeing a replay of the launch, which occurred just about 6 minutes and 40 seconds ago. And I should tell you that the shuttle right now is doing fine as we speak. It was an incredible sight, as you can see there. Of course, that first 2 minutes, Tony, is the critical period of time for anybody, of course, who remembers the Challenger disaster and the loss caused by the solid rocket boosters. Until those solid rocket boosters are jettisoned, I think a lot of people hold their breath, don't they?
They do indeed. In fact, we were talking here, the words that from mission control here at go at throttle up are still the kind of words when your heart kind of stops for a minute, because that was the point where the Challenger exploded just shortly after those words. And so we still wait for that, wait to see the SRBs be jettisoned, and it's usually a beautiful sight, especially at night, when you could see those 2 dots of those engines as they float away from Endeavour as it gained its altitude. We're just getting a report in from James Hartsfield. The speed of the space shuttle Endeavour is now 15,000 miles an hour after about just shy of 8 minutes of flight.
1,500 miles per hour, 8 miles northeast of the Kennedy Space Center.
Half a minute before those main engines cut off, and when those main engines cut off, the crew, which has been experiencing 3Gs, in other words, their body feels 3 times heavier than normal. When those main engines cut off, they'll unstrap those belts around them, and they'll suddenly be experiencing 0G, and that is the satisfying moment which any shuttle crew member will tell you all about. That is the moment that they train so long and hard for. As we look at this replay here, main engine cutoff has occurred, and that means the Space Shuttle Endeavour will now coast into orbit at 17,000 and change miles per hour. Mach 25 is the speed which gets it into orbit.
We copy. Nominal MECO. No ohms 1 required.
Booster officer confirms the jettison of the external fuel tank.
What you've just witnessed is absolutely a flawless launch, and what they were basically saying there is that the main engine cutoff happened exactly as it should have, and the orbiter will not have to use an additional series of engines called orbital maneuvering systems to attain its proper orbit. That's just a backup system which allows them to attain orbit if need be, but the main engines did their job, as well as the solid rocket boosters, and the 6-member crew of Endeavour is now in orbit around the planet, beginning what will be a 12-day mission, an historic mission, the first assembly mission of the International Space Station. Rosemary?
Miles O'Brien, thank you for your time out at the Kennedy Space Center. And that concludes our live coverage of the successful launch of the Space Shuttle Endeavour. We'll now return you to regular CNN programming.
This has been a CNN Live event.
Hello, I'm Rosemary Church at the CNN Centre. First, here's a look at the headlines.
We have main engine
The first
start.
assembly mission
4,
of the
3,
International
2,
Space Station is
1.
underway.
We have booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour with the first American
The
element.
United States Space Shuttle Endeavour blasted off about a half hour ago. Endeavour is carrying the first US-built piece of the space station. The astronauts plan to rendezvous Sunday with an orbiting Russian-made module, then connect the two pieces in a series of spacewalks. Police in
From CNN International, this is World News with Rosemary Church at the CNN Center in Atlanta.
Hello and thanks for joining us. Coming up on this edition of World News, the Space Shuttle Endeavour blasts off toward construction of a planned space station.
Booster ignition.
Civil war in our innermost thoughts of a taxi driver. International dignitaries are celebrating Friday's launch of the Space Shuttle Endeavour. On board is the second component of the International Space Station. For more on the mission, CNN's Miles O'Brien joins us live from the Kennedy Space Center. Miles.
Rosemary, the mission of the Space Shuttle Endeavour is now about an hour and a half old, which means the Shuttle Endeavour has already circled the Earth once. So far, everything is going according to plan as far as NASA would like to see it. And that included, about an hour and a half ago, a flawless launch from the Kennedy Space Center.
4, 3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour with the first American element of the International Space Station, uniting our efforts in space to achieve our common goals.
Roll program.
8.5 minutes after leaving Launch Pad 39A, the shuttle became an orbiter, shedding the bonds of gravity. The 6-member crew was off to work in space. Meanwhile, back here at the Launch Control Center at the Kennedy Space Center, U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was here seeing her first launch, and she had an opportunity to address some of the men and women in the trenches.
In foreign policy, we have our version of launches, and we don't get it right the second time often. So all my admiration to you. Amazing job. I do believe in the space program. I want to do everything I can to help. I've said that as Secretary of State, all day long I deal with disputes on the ground, countries that can't get along, and it's great to look at this Space Station Endeavour, which shows the fact that we have 14 countries working together on the kinds of issues that the 21st century is going to be concerned with. So my congratulations to all of you. Stupendous work, and I admire you, and I will have a personal attachment to the whole program from now on. Thank you.
Here's the basic work schedule for this particular mission of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, the first assembly mission of the International Space Station. On Sunday, Endeavour will rendezvous with that Russian piece, the Zarya piece. The 50-foot robotic arm of the space shuttle, operated by astronaut Nancy Curry, will gently place Zarya on top of the first U.S. piece, Unity. Then, the next day, Monday, the first of 3 tricky spacewalks. Astronauts Jerry Ross and Jim Newman will spend a lot of time out there connecting cables, attaching antennas, handholds, and the like. And then after the second spacewalk, the crew will actually pressurize the 2 units which form the fledgling space station, and they will step inside carrying tools. They will remove bolts and brackets which have been attached to both of the modules for launch to make them more structurally sound. This is, in the history of the 17-year shuttle program, as complex a shuttle mission as has ever been attempted. But just to put that into perspective, the folks here at NASA say this is a fairly straightforward, simple space station construction mission. So there's a lot of work ahead for NASA and its partners. Miles O'Brien, CNN, reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
Thank you, Miles, for that update.
We have booster ignition and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour with the first American element of the International Space Station United.
Space officials in the United States are calling it a milestone for the International Space Station. The Space Shuttle Endeavour blasted off Friday on board the U.S.-built Unity node, part of the 16-nation space station project. Shuttle crew members are to rendezvous Sunday with an orbiting Russian-built module. Their 12-day mission includes 3 spacewalks in which the astronauts will try to connect the space station components. Britain and France have signed a letter in orbit on a mission to start building the International Space Station. As CNN's Miles O'Brien reports, the astronauts have been preparing for quite some time.
Booster ignition and
Tool time at last. 2.5 years after their training began, the crew of the Space Shuttle Endeavour streaked off the launch pad, punching into low Earth orbit for some high-flying hard labor. It is the first in a long assembly line of missions to build the behemoth International Space Station. They're led by Commander Bob Cabana, a Marine colonel on his 4th shuttle mission.
Flying is what I have loved ever since I was a little kid. It's all I ever wanted to do. And it's something that God's given me a gift for.
The crew will be mating the first U.S. piece of the space station with a Russian component already in orbit. Army Colonel Nancy Curry will grasp and move the 25-ton Russian piece into place. As she did on her 2 previous flights, this mother has left behind a poignant letter for her daughter.
I thought it was very, very crucial to convey to her that if anything happened, why I had taken the risk that I did. And although that maybe that meant her growing up without a mom, that firmly felt in my heart that it was the right thing to do.
Much of the work on this mission will occur outside the station. On his 6th flight, Air Force Colonel Jerry Ross will lead 3 long spacewalks to connect 40 cables, attach handholds, and install antennas.
There's never a boring moment, and certainly if you do get bored, you can always lean back and watch the Earth go by, and I can't imagine anybody getting bored by that.
But the hard-charging commander leading the mission says he won't let the flight go by without encouraging his crew to stop and smell the roses.
So I tell folks, don't take a picture. You gotta find a few free minutes and park yourself in front of a window and just look out and make a memory.
But there may not be much time for planet gazing. This crew has their work cut out for them. In the 17 years of the Space Shuttle program, there hasn't been a more complicated mission. Miles O'Brien, CNN at the Kennedy Space Center, Florida.